Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar series of the IEEE Open Journal of Engineering, Medicine, and Biology. Today, we're going to have a panel discussion on the topic, what is happening with NIH-funded research? We have 9 outstanding individuals who will participate as panel members to the discussion. I will not take the time to introduce them individually because it would take too much time, and we just have 1 hour today. I'll just ask questions. I'll serve as moderator, and I'll ask for their input on a number of topics. The webinar has been really motivated and inspired by an editorial that Professor Don Ingber recently published in IEEE OJEMB. And therefore, I'm going to ask him first to provide us with a brief summary of the editorial and propose a few points for the discussion then by the panel member. Don Ingber is an American cell biologist and bioengineer who is known to be the founding director of the Wyss Institute and is also a professor at Harvard Medical School. So thank you, Don, for agreeing to be part of this panel. And could you tell us a bit about the editorial that you just published in our journal?
Sure. Just briefly, at a really high level, I mean, I read the executive order on February 7th, and on the weekend I was very angry and felt like I had to say something. But what I think is important about my message is everyone is very frustrated and I think arguing that science is important and critical for medical breakthroughs and so forth. But I can see this administration and they don't care. I think they really don't care. All they care about is dollars and money, international competitiveness, China, things like that. And the title of my article was bringing the American economic flywheel to a screeching halt, because what most people don't appreciate, and apparently this administration, is that science drives technology. And technology is what made us the leading, most competitive society in history. I mean, optical fibers, microchips, personal computers, and more recently, breakthroughs like CRISPR. And that starts in science. And the funding that goes to NIH, NSF, the DARPAs, the ARPA-H's, is what that basically fuels the pipeline. And they are just going to close that down. And that was, so one thing message I guess I want to bring across is that I think all of us that are scientists, of course, we need to talk about the impact on medical breakthroughs, but we need to translate it into terms that these people care about. We have to think about what, their perspective. And we've probably seen in the news that, I think in my article, I quote something where there was a Nature index that the top 10 physics institutes or universities are not American. We're like 13th in terms of nations, in terms of leadership in physics. China's way up there. And the executive order was around indirect costs, and they don't understand at all what indirects cover. A lot of our indirect costs are because the government requires us through various regulations to deal with things like export controls and conflict of interest and animal protocols and so forth. And they use the argument that the rate should go down to foundations, but the foundations don't require us to do those things. So I also, of course, am worried about the future workforce and the impact, which has already happened in terms of turning students away from science. It was already happening years ago that there were very few Americans, but the brain drain is one end, and then the closing the faucet on feeding young people into the process this is going to hurt us. I mean, even if they turned it back today, it's already going to hurt us. And so I think I'll stop here because so many people have things to say. And I mentioned in my article about how every dollar NIH spends gets amplified. You'll hear more about that. But it's really this thoughtlessness that we have to kind of, the only way to battle is not to scream louder and louder how important we are, but how this will impact what they care about, which is economic and international competitiveness. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Don. And I really appreciate that in your editorial you mentioned how good is the return on investment that we get from NIH funding. And we're lucky today to have Caitlin Leach from Northwestern University, who serves as president of United for Medical Research, who has published actually that report. So Caitlin, I wonder if you could provide us a bit of background and understand that a new report was just made available this week. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, that's right. And thank you for the opportunity to join this important conversation. As mentioned, I serve as the president for United for Medical Research, which is a coalition of leading research institutions, patient advocates, and private industry, all advocating together to seek strong and sustainable increases for NIH in order for them to continue the mission of saving and improving lives, advancing innovation, and fueling the economy. So annually, UMR puts out an economic impact report. We actually just released our 2025 update yesterday. This report underscores NIH's role as a generator of economic impact, in addition, obviously, to their role in developing research breakthroughs for patients. Our report found that in fiscal year 2024, the nearly $37 billion that NIH awarded in research grants across all 50 states and the District of Columbia supported more than 407,000 jobs and generated about $95 billion in new economic activity nationwide. So it's a powerful return on investment. Our data shows, as you alluded to, John, that $2.56 is generated for every $1 invested in NIH research. And these economic benefits are felt across the country, red states, blue states, everywhere, because NIH dollars are fueling local economies and improving people's health in every state.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And we have three physicians here and researchers. And I believe Virginia, the Dr. Slocum, is actually among the attendees by mistake. So if you could help her just get into the panel, the members room, that would be super. But I wanted to ask Steve Schachter and Ruth Schneider. Steve is, they're both neurologists. Steve is at Harvard Medical School. Ruth is at University of Rochester. And they have the privilege of both receiving funding for research as well as they serve as physicians. They actually see, they have seen, at least for Steve, patients throughout their careers. So I wonder if you could comment on the advantage and benefits of being able to, in fact, receive funding from NIH and other funding agencies to advance the quality of care for our patients. Steve, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you very much, Paulo, for the invite and for arranging this very important topic for discussion. I'm sorry I missed the first few minutes of Don's presentation. I think what I would like to emphasize in my remarks is why the NIH, based on my experience, why the NIH is so important to the long-term health and well-being of this country. And it's because the NIH, let me back up a second. The figures that we just heard from Caitlin reflect a long process for each innovation. The device market, the diagnostics, and the technologies that help monitor our health whether we wear it, if we have diabetes, we wear it on our arm, or if we're in the ICU, it's measuring all our vital signs. All of that technology started off as a very innovative, high-risk project. High risk meaning that there's no guarantee it was going to be successful. And a lot of that innovation in medical devices and diagnostics begins in university settings, what we call academia, and a lot of it begins in what we call startup companies, which are very small companies, typically started by people that came from university settings, and they have an idea, but to bring that product to the marketplace ultimately takes substantial investment. There's no two ways about it. And investors who want to make a return on their investment are less likely to invest in projects at that very early stage because they're exploring brand new territory. There's a fair chance that they won't be successful. But they are the vital feeder projects for the medical device industry. It's like without minnows, you can't have big fish, if that's a metaphor that makes sense. The NIH is one of a few sources of funding for innovators at this very early stage. No one else, we don't see private investment at that stage. Sometimes family and friends will provide financial support, but the NIH has a unique role in this country for providing that high-risk funding early on in order for project ideas to move forward so that they can receive the appropriate investment to eventually come to the marketplace and help all of us and our family members. So I want us to focus on that fact that there is really very little alternative other than the NIH for early research of what we call during the translational part. And that is exactly what the Blueprint MedTech program of NIH supports, which I'm fortunate enough to be a PI on.
Thank you, Steve. Ruth, any comments from you?
As Paolo mentioned, I'm a neurologist and a movement disorder specialist. So I will share something that is near and dear to my heart, which is the field of Parkinson's disease. So in the US alone, there's nearly 1 million people living with Parkinson's disease. And the gold standard, most effective treatment that we have is and has been levodopa for the past 50 years. And that discovery of levodopa was funded by basic science and clinical research that was supported in part by the National Institutes of Health. And I offer that just as an example of how the NIH's support has led to treatments that have been really critical to the management of neurodegenerative diseases and diseases across the spectrum. And so without a robust National Institutes of Health and one that is free of censorship and restrictions on what we can and cannot study, we cannot continue to develop new treatments and to lead scientific discoveries and so I think this notion that we can rely on foundations and philanthropy to kind of pick up what the NIH won't fund or to pick up the slack in the reduction in indirects, it's just not going to be sustainable.
Thank you, Ruth. And we're lucky enough to have Chloe Slocum. Thank you, Chloe, for joining us. She is a physiatrist who specializes in spinal injury. And Chloe, I was wondering if you have any comments or you want to provide examples of how research has a direct impact on the healthcare sector and your clinical practice.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Paolo, and it's an honor to be here. I think, within the NIH, there's sort of different things I think that we don't necessarily realize. There is this aspect of, conducting, potentially high risk, but definitely high reward research, and also starting things that really lay the groundwork for commercialization and things that then are done on a much bigger scale, and really funding that formative work from a scientific perspective. But I think what's underappreciated are things like the National Library of Medicine, how many researchers, how many just investigators in both the academic and then in the private sector use PED, and the fact that the NIH and other different agencies through HHS as well are funded, and they do this work of sort of longitudinal monitoring, looking at, for instance, total economic costs of care. That we don't have health systems that are doing that. We largely don't have anyone doing that on, for instance, the state level, but institutes like the National Institute on Aging are doing that. When we compare ourselves to other countries like Taiwan and some of the Scandinavian countries that have really big registries, where they're able to track long-term outcomes, we actually are unique in the US in that the federally funded model systems are the longest registry for traumatic spinal cord injury, for example, in existence. So we sort of predate those registries in Europe and in other places in the world. And so I think that idea that sort of we're funding things that are the engine of knowledge, essentially, and those collaborations generate things that are sort of immediately applicable at the point of practice, if we know, or can lead us to advocate better for instance, community supports or changes in how we're delivering care. That help us really improve the value of that care over time in a very practical and sometimes more immediate way.
Thank you, Chloe. We have two outstanding biomedical engineers on the panel, Joyce Wong and Shreya. Joyce is a professor of biomedical engineering at Boston University. Shreya is also a professor of biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins. I wonder, Joyce and Shreya, if you could offer some comments in terms of the impact of technology developed on the basis of federally funded projects and their impact on healthcare, as well as, because you're both in teaching institutions, if you could comment on the value of training the new generation of biomedical engineers.
Yes, thank you, Paulo. And thank you for the invitation for this really important discussion. And so when it comes to technology, I think I echo everything that everyone has said already. I'll just add to it that, for example, that technology really drives access. So for example, I can think of recent advances in ultrasound where you can plug it into your iPhone, right? That's just such a game changer because we have, challenges in delivering healthcare, to rural areas. But then also my colleague here at Boston University, Ed Damiano, where he's really kind of revolutionized life for diabetic patients, really closing the loop and having the continuous glucose monitor and the loop where it basically doesn't require any intervention. But I want to come back to this point that Caitlin and Don and others have made about this really amazing kind of return on investment for the NIH research, where it generates more than $2.50 in economic activity. So one way to think about this is that even though you have this great, incredible return on investment, and we're seeing all these cuts to NIH, we continue to see critical areas that are underfunded. So for example, something I think a lot of people can relate to is kidney disease. A lot of people are on kidney dialysis. It affects millions of Americans, but it really receives disproportionately low funding, like compared to, let's say, neuroscience or something, relative to its burden. Or another example is women's health research, something that's near and dear to my heart, and not just reproductive health, but really understanding fundamental sex-based differences, ranging from cardiovascular disease to Alzheimer's disease. It's really been well established across the entire life course that there is really different kinds of therapies because, men and women will actually react differently to the treatment. And so this is probably the most underfunded area, and it's really, really just tearing me up seeing it getting even smaller. So, but coming back to this return on investment, what's really interesting is that McKinsey recently published a report, talking about how the women's health gap, if you could close that gap, you could potentially add $1 trillion to the global economy. And when I see like Doge going on and trying to cut, I think, well, okay, sure, cutting is one way to do this, but wouldn't it be much smarter to basically, do this return on investment? And that's much more effective than this trickle down economics. So then switching over to the training part, Chloe, you mentioned Taiwan. So that's, near and dear to my heart because my parents both they immigrated from Taiwan, and they came here in the 1960s, at a time when the US was really wanting scientists from other countries, right? And then seeing Don's op-ed, it's really killing me to see the reverse brain drain. I would never have thought that would be the opposite, that we have people going away from the US. So I think it's, people have mentioned already, there's universities that have cut down the number of slots for graduate students, and it's really this danger of losing this next generation of scientists. And we know that for the competitive edge, so AI is not going to fix everything. I'm sorry to say. I mean, I would love if it could, but we're just not there yet. So I just really think, in fact, we need to invest more in NIH and NSF, these basic science. It's where you're not quite sure, what it's going to lead to, but it has revolutionized technology.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Shri.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and it's great to see you, Joyce. So yeah, maybe just a couple of things to add. I want to maybe provide some examples of technologies that have literally transformed. So I'll kind of categorize it as early detection technologies versus technologies that allow for preventative medicine, which is a huge savings in the healthcare system, and then more recent and future if I have the opportunity. So for me, something just fundamental, advanced imaging. Right? Think of MRI scans, CT scans, and people are still, there's a lot of NIH research going to building better, higher resolution imaging technologies. So what's the impact? They've completely revolutionized diagnostics. They provide high resolution images of internal organs. They enable early detection of diseases like cancer, stroke, neurological disorders. It matters. Why? Because it has actually reduced the need for exploratory surgeries and allowed for more precise treatments. I tried to get at sort of the impact. So imaging alone in the United States, about 80 million CT scans and 40 million MRI scans are performed annually. And globally, the estimates are around 300 to 400 million CT scans, 100 to 150 million MRI scans. So it's just the basic idea of a technology allowing for detection, right? And then we have things that are more preventative, I mentioned, which are sort of more wearable health techs like smartwatches. You mentioned continuous glucose monitors, devices like the Apple Watch that have ECG monitoring, provide real-time health data and early warning signs, right, for conditions like heart conditions or glucose imbalances. And this matters because it actually empowers us, patients, to monitor our own health, leading to better management of chronic conditions and also early detection of problems down the road. The one thing I will mention, training, that I think is often, and hasn't been really a soundbite in the news or even amongst our communities, research is not just about the discoveries. For us in academic institutions, research enables training the next generation of talent. We spent years, 5, 6 years, with individuals, mentoring them, not just in the research project, but about life-sustaining skills, right? How you stay optimistic, persistent, resilient, patient. You gain all these skills being supported by these research grants as a student, right? And so I actually like to think that my legacy is going to be more about the students I trained. I'm going to definitely train many, many, many more students than I am going to have world-changing discoveries. And I just don't want that to be overlooked.
Thank you so much, Shri. So we have two outstanding individuals from the medical industry, Chad Andersen, who recently took the position as editor-in-chief of IEEE Pulse, but has a lot of experience in the private sector, led many companies with interest in different diseases. And Nancy Gagliano, who in addition to be a physician, is very well known for her executive roles, collaborations with NIH on the RADx Tax project, and I think most of us are familiar with her work when she served as chief medical officer and revolutionized CVS Minute Clinic. So I wonder if Chad and Nancy could offer the perspective from the medical industry. Chad?
Yeah, thank you, Paolo, and it's an honor to be here with you guys. I come in from the industry side. I've been a part of some amazing companies and people and started companies in this space. Shout out to some amazing SBIR award winners like Brian McLaughlin with over 25 million into a company, as well as some friends in Blue Arbor Point Technologies, around 50 million in non-dilutive funding through NIH, NSF, and DARPA. And there's countless stories of this. And I love the statistic that says $1 NIH fund going into turning into about $2.46. That's a number to hang our hats on. The SBIR world, and even further with the Blueprint MedTech that Stephen talked about. I have also the honor of being about 3 or 4 of the Blueprint MedTech companies as a board seat. So watching these companies come to life is always an amazing thing. But the important thing to realize is that all these changes and cuts and potential budget cuts, SBIRs are a budget percentage. So the NIH and NSF and they don't have a choice to increase their SBIR budget if they get a larger piece of the pie from Congress. It's a set number. And so that challenges what the goal of the SBIR world is and small businesses and the translations out of universities with these small businesses. And that's definitely damaging and something that is, again, we're looking at a guaranteed return on a lot of these investments, at least giving jobs. And why it exists is to put innovation forward. This is not, I want to come from the world of investors. If you're an investor, let's just imagine yourself, your own money, right? What are you investing in at your stock market? And you're not going to invest in stuff that's super high risk. You're going to have things that are something or less risky. But the NIH and the SBIR program is made for risky things, high risk, high reward. It's not, we say this in the medical device world, it's not just another screw and a rod for spine fusions, right? There's a million of those out there. And that's what's pushing us and hopefully going to be pushing our country forward into innovations. And I fear that if any types of cuts are going to really damage our prospects. We already are in a bad slump in investment right now. So if you want to look at translating and bringing ideas to human patients to impact their lives, to change the course of their health, we're already a little bit behind. Most investors weren't investing in these high risk, high rewards. They were reinvesting in companies to keep them alive. And so we already have this gap that's over the last 4 years has widened, which is high risk, high reward ideas that are not getting funded. So a lot of companies are disappearing. Newer technologies that we're translating on universities are disappearing. And the investor community is over here just trying to get stuff to market that they've already invested in, not to lose it. And you can't blame them. And if there's any cut further to these high risk and high reward technologies, we're looking at an even longer delay of any type of, again, life-changing technologies bringing to market. I know the universities are doing great, but to get it out of a university, to go through the FDA, to work through CMS, to work through reimbursement and coding and drugs approval processes, these are long, arduous processes filled with funding pitfalls. And so it's amazing what we can do with the federal work. Again, the multiplication of money. But it does, we're already on a trajectory that needs to be, I think, very closely looked at for us moving forward.
Thank you, Chad. Nancy?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for your time, and I'm thrilled to be here with such esteemed guests. I've had a very unique career. Started in academic medicine at Mass General Hospital, primary care. I was very involved in the integration of technology into healthcare. Then went to CVS, where I was the chief medical officer, increasing access, using lots of innovative concepts to change how healthcare is perceived. And then I spent a couple of years working under the NIH for RADx, which I'll talk about in a minute. And now I'm on a couple of boards for a private and a startup company. And in reflection of this talk, I realized that the NIH has touched me and has helped every single company or organization that I've worked for be successful through the entire continuum. And I know a lot of people think of the NIH as, oh, this is basic research in big, complex medical academic organizations. They'll survive. But I think everybody has highlighted that it's not just the research, it's what happens to the research. And if it has touched my life and my career in business, in the government, in healthcare, in pharmacy, the effects are enormous to the entire country. When I started many, many years ago, if you had your gallbladder out, you were in the hospital for 10 days. Nowadays, nobody even thinks about a gallbladder surgery because it's a laparoscopic surgery and you're out the same day. I'd like to talk about RADx Tech for just a minute. Many of you are very familiar with what happened under Steve's leadership and friendship. He called me and said, help, help. And if you remember, we were at the beginning of COVID and there were no diagnostics. So we had this impending pandemic and no way to test it. And we knew it was going to affect millions of people. We had academic organizations who had done basic research and knew how to do research. We had companies who knew how to get product to market. We had industry expert who knew all the nuances of getting product to market. And the NIH funded this incredible organization where we all came together. And we're talking about 300 people at least on a day-to-day basis working on this and trying to get tests done, developed and out into the market quickly. And we were able, with the NIH guidance and funding, we were able to take a process that typically took around 4 to 5 years and turn it around to 9 months. And we started with hundreds and hundreds of companies who had ideas, picked the ones that were most promising, funded them, provided them guidance, and we got tests onto the market. No other organization had the ability to fund such an endeavor, as well as to bring industry, academia, and expertise together to make this happen. So it's bigger. It's much bigger than just basic research in academic organizations. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Nancy. This is a great transition for the second round, which we will have to speed up a bit because we don't have a lot of time, right? And so, but I was wondering, along these lines, I think that people realize how transformative and outside the box was the RADx program. And we have Steve and Shreya on the call here. You both have been involved in many initiatives, not just RADx, but the point-of-care technology, if I can call it consortium, Steve, and the Blueprint, the NIH Blueprint program. Any comments from you, Steve and Shreya, in that regard?
Thank you. Yeah, so the RADx, as Nancy mentioned, was NIH-funded program in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was actually pushed in Congress by two Republican senators, one from Tennessee, the other from Missouri, who published an op-ed in the Washington Post about how diagnostics were the key for America to get through and beyond the pandemic. Congress appropriated $1.5 billion to NIH with the president's approval at that time. And NIH Director Francis Collins, in turn, gave the responsibility of this program to one of his institutes, NIBIB. We were already in position as a coordinating, when I say we, CIMMIT, the group I work with in Boston, was already in place as a coordinating center for a point of care technology consortium, as Paula said. So we were then given the responsibility of designing, standing up, maintaining, and conducting the extramural part of this program, with the mandate to be able to produce enough tests for every American that needs to be tested, and to get products to the marketplace in months rather than years, which is typical, as Nancy mentioned. To do this, we, in the midst of a pandemic, was hard enough, but the scale and scope of this program required us to creatively think about the whole process, from soliciting proposals all the way through to supporting projects and getting product to the marketplace. This was literally a bench to bedside program. We not only managed a call for proposals, but we also mentored the companies that received the funding, and we even paid for large-scale manufacturing and delivery to the end user. So this was quite an unusual program. But in the process of re-engineering, if you will, the workflow associated with translational research, we demonstrated it's possible to quickly bring products to the marketplace and to a selection process that narrowed down candidate projects to those that we believe were most likely to succeed. You might have seen some, Paula, I know I'm taking a lot of time, but I'll finish in a minute. You might have seen press at the time that's called it a deep dive. Well, we had a deep dive component, which was managed by entrepreneurs in medical technology who worked for us, not for the companies that we were funding. Long story short, the way that we re-engineered the workflow associated with this was not only successful in terms of meeting the original mission of the program to get products to the marketplace and help get the country through this, but it also was a proof of concept for a new set of practices related to finding, funding, and facilitating translational research, which Francis Collins publicly said a few times should become the standard going forward. And in fact, the Blueprint program that we mentioned already a couple times is modeled after RADx, as is about another 10 or 15 programs in a variety of fields. It combines the best of business and academic practices. It does not waste money on projects that have little chance of succeeding, and it gets products to the marketplace to help people as quickly as possible. So this kind of program is simply not possible outside of the NIH. And I think is a very good case example for people to look at the power of NIH in terms of investing in high-risk, early-stage translational work.
Thank you so much, Steve. Shreya, you also have, in addition to be part of SPI, one of the hubs for one of the NIH Blueprint program, you also have the perspective of an entrepreneur. Any additional comments?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Yeah, so I'm a neuroengineer. I develop neurotechnologies to better diagnose, treat neurological disorders like epilepsy and chronic pain are my focus in research. Yes, and so I'm also have a startup company, and as someone who's only been in academia my professional life. I'm really good at, conducting research. I've learned how to do it, how to train students and so forth. But what we don't learn is, okay, you've got this great technology, great idea. Okay, first of all, does anybody need it? Right? Is there a real clinical need? Okay, if there's a clinical need, okay, what's the path to market? How do you take it? Who's going to pay for it? How much do you pay for it? Are there competition around? Is it going to pass FDA approval or clearance? Right? All of these things that you have to figure out and move through, as little milestones as an entrepreneur, we're not taught in academia. We have no training, no formal training. And with that said, in a program like the Blueprint and the RADx, it takes people like me who might be coming up with interesting research and actually mentor us through the process to figure out all of those answers to those questions so that our ideas, our discoveries are much more likely to reach patients. And so that's, so it's an incredible program. And the last thing I'll say about Blueprint and what happened during COVID and the NIH's involvement is we did something remarkable in a sense of urgency, right? We needed the diagnostics because people are dying around the globe. But then after this all happened and we succeed, it's like, why aren't we doing this like in general, in regular life, in a non-pandemic, right? Shouldn't we be doing this more? And that's really gave birth to the Blueprint program.
Thank you so much, Shreya. I mean, these are examples of experiments that are becoming practice of ways to make the whole process more efficient, and not just to get papers, but to actually have concrete impact. The Wyss Institute is quite an example from this point of view. Don, do you want to offer any comments about it?
Yeah, I mean, the Wyss Institute was formed basically to have near-term impact by developing a catalytic process to essentially not only get ideas from the bench to the bedside, and also we do environment too, so it help the health of the planet as well as people, but also train people, and as Sri was saying, to actually train by doing, by apprenticing, to learn how to be entrepreneurial and understand what is required. One thing I will do a little bit of a call out is that the government is being thoughtless about these cuts, and you're hearing ideas that, rather than just cut the dollars, let's use the dollars in more effective ways to bring about the greatest payback on investment. And we all know everyone's going to have to cut back. Let's cut back in a thoughtful way. I think at the Wyss, we harness all of the insights that have come out of NIH funding, NSF funding, and then we develop a process where we actually, we give people complete creative freedom to kind of build those ideas. And the only time we actually review anything is when we have teams of young people who have a passionate idea and they think there's a possibility of bringing it out. We have our own strategic intellectual property attorneys, which is really novel, and give feedback really early on. And that's part of something we're not taught about in academia, right? Not sending a patent to be written like an academic institution, but having interactions with attorneys who say not patentable, but if you did this and this, it would be transformative. That changes your path of research early on. So like integrating the entrepreneurial process into science lets one do it faster and more effectively, and we're only 11 core faculty, all part-time, and another about 11 associate, and we're responsible for this past year over 25% of all of Harvard University's IP startups and licensing. I mean, so there are processes. Now, we didn't mention ARPA-H, which is probably going to be cut back dramatically, which is really trying to do something novel, more like DARPA. We didn't mention DARPA and BARDA and all these other government agencies who are going to get cut to smithereens too, probably. And they fill in a little bit of the space between the early NIH just, starting to get ideas to explored and moving it along this process. And someone has to tie up. We have to convince them to take a thoughtful look about, where can we save costs and where we can't. The one thing I will volunteer is if the government stopped paying publication costs, we would save a huge percentage of every NIH grant if we just did preprints and had some process to evaluate them. You want to cut money? Let's cut money in a thoughtful way. Let's cut the regulations that require that we hire 5 administrators. So I think we need to maybe come up with alternatives that are constructive rather than destructive. I think that's all I'll say. But I totally agree that there are models that work, and if we can get the government to fund that, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Don. Joyce, as past president of the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering, I trust you've been exposed to many of these examples of thinking outside the box to be more efficient. Anything that you want to share with the attendees today?
Yes. Well, what I want to share with AIMBE's role. So how I think of AIMBE is it's a really great organization that is meant to do advocacy and really bring the right key stakeholders together. So just to give you an example, so AIMBE, nearly 25 years ago, together, they made a coalition with the Academy of Radiology and Biomedical Imaging Research, and that was from that partnership, it basically created NIBIB, which was so President Clinton signed it in December of 2000, and so the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, which we've already heard that they supported RADx, and so it's just incredible the amount of kinds of technology that's coming out from there, and so that's just one example of how it's really the infrastructure and advocating for that. And so, but another aspect of AIMBE is that we have basically 3 pillars. We have the College of Fellows, and there's a large fraction of them are from academia, but also the next one is from industry, and then we also have from government. And it's really having the forum to have these 3 really key stakeholders talking to each other and sharing ideas and talking about like these milestones and lowering barriers on how can you accelerate innovation and really getting it from bench to bedside. And we typically have these conversations, and we actually have in a little over 2 weeks, we have our annual meeting coming up in DC. And so ordinarily we would talk to each other, but what saddens me is that, again, the government employees, they're like NIH and others, they're not allowed to attend. And so that's already something that it is, if you're separating people and not allowing them to talk, that's just not good in general. So we really need to find ways how we can, get over these communication bans. But just one other example I'll give is that with this key stakeholders is that so some of you may know the forever chemicals PFAS, how it's first of all, it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's so critical for critically saving medical devices. For example, a lot of catheters and heart, pacemakers actually use the per and polyfluoral alkyl substances, right? This in the processing, and it's important because forever may be good if it's a medical device. You don't want it to degrade and go down. But on the other hand, there are key kind of there have been some negative health effects, for example, low birth weight and even reduction of immune response. And so what you really want to do is have the key stakeholders of industry coming together. So last year, AIMBE put together a forum where there was industry, academia. You had the federal agencies that actually weren't even talking to each other before. And so I think it's through those kinds of interactions that we have to we have to keep those in place. We just cannot we have to find some way that we keep that communication open. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joyce. Nancy and Chad, any examples of thinking outside the box to have a concrete impact on the medical industry? And we really have just 1 minute each, so we need to
I'll go really, really quickly, and I'll wrap in my summary as part of this. So the first thing that absolutely comes to mind is my role at CVS Health, where I was chief medical officer. When I got there, we had 300 clinics. When I left, we had well over 1,000, and we were seeing 6 million patients a day. A year. And there were so many innovations as part of it. Almost all of them indirectly touched by the NIH, but the biggest one was point of care testing, because MinuteClinic could not exist without point of care testing. And that created incredible access to people all over the country. And just in closing, I just wanted to highlight what Don had said about it. If we don't make it clear that we think there are things that can be cut, that we're just somebody else saying, don't touch us, leave us alone, we want the money. But I think many of us can see waste, can see opportunities to cut costs, and that's what our focus should be, to not fight the cutting of the costs, but actually ask and help support it being done wisely.
Thank you, Nancy. Chat, just briefly.
No, thank you. And Nancy, thank you to CVS. I've enjoyed the MinuteClinics many times. But I would say one of the better things, of course, in the realm of startups is you need time to make your ideas product market fit. I think Shreya said it. I'll reiterate that that's important, that these founders and these early stage users get that time to be creative, right? You need time to be creative. You need real time to see how the market works and give it time. So these benefits of SBIR, STTR, Blueprint, everything that's translating and getting it out is critical, and having that time, that non-dilutive funding, because as soon as you get an investor, you have somebody breathing down your neck. You've got pressure, and you have to move along, and you can't really stop. And sometimes it just ends up failing. And versus this amazing time you get with the industry, I want to say, again, the benefits of what we've seen in the SBIR on the studies that at least done from up until about 2020, there's 34 FDA PMAs that were made through and having a history with the SBIR STTR program, and 2,475 510Ks came through the SBIR STTR program, and as well as 99 drugs, which was during the same time frame was 12% had touched the SBIR and STTR program. So, seeing the benefit is there. And I think it only is going to need to increase for us to, again, stay on top of our human health and getting our nation moving forward with that.
Thank you, Chad. Ruth, do you want to offer some thoughts in your closing remarks?
Thank you. Much of my work is on the use of decentralized clinical research studies and digital health technologies, and the NIH's support of that work has really been critical, and that has allowed us to bring together folks from different backgrounds, right? So that I, as a neurologist and a clinician, can work with computer scientists and AI experts to advance this research. So I just wanted to echo the comment about bringing people from different backgrounds into the same room, on a small scale and a larger scale, as others have talked about. And I hope that we all can help to come up with solutions to this present crisis and move forward thoughtfully, as others have suggested. Thanks, Pablo.
Thank you, Ruth. Chloe, what can we do with advocacy? You're really a champion in this area.
Sure. I think it's never, outside of somebody's scope to be an advocate, especially for improving patient care. And I think that the work of NIH is so important in terms of both helping advance the care delivery system by making point of care testing, by making research available, and really transforming our clinical practice day by day. And so I would encourage folks to, get to know your elected representatives, become skilled at communicating. I think as a clinician, I am constantly working on communicating in ways that, resonate with my patients, with my peers, with my colleagues, and trying to break it down into language and concepts that people understand. I think the idea of indirect costs and sort of being able to articulate, like, what does that actually mean? What does it pay for? It might pay for air conditioning. That means that you have a piece of equipment that, only runs at a certain temperature, but that enables breakthroughs in a specific discipline for a specific condition, and being able to speak to that. Just think, how would you explain it to a family member? How would you explain it to somebody who's not in medicine? I think these are all advocacy skills that you can work on, from micro skills to macro skills. And I will just say again, I think that in the research sphere, we're able to look at different paradigms. And in terms of this idea of efficiency and cost savings, this is where we're able to do work that we can really look at what is it to be meaningfully efficient when we're delivering care. As a clinician, I care about getting people back to the community and getting them to be healthy. And there's so many things that we can appreciate from claims-based data within a particular plan year. And so research is really helpful at developing all of these paradigms. So I'll say that.
Thank you, Chloe. Caitlin, do you want to close? What would you suggest that we ask Congress to do?
Yes, absolutely. So one thing that I did want to add before I close is that NIH has benefited from bipartisan support, and I think that it is very important to keep in mind and to continue our advocacy efforts across. NIH benefits every American, regardless of where they live and who they vote for. So it's very important, I think, for us to keep that in mind. And this is a time of constrained budgets. We're all aware of that. So the points about coming to this conversation with clear eyes about how we can kind of find compromise to move forward, I think is very important. So I would encourage everyone to advocate to your elected officials, to share the message that it is imperative for Congress to continue funding biomedical research at the National Institutes of Health at robust levels. As you've heard, obviously, as we covered during this call, uncertainty in NIH budgets, in administrative actions or policy related to research is detrimental to sort of our nation's, long-standing and very successful biomedical innovation ecosystem. And that's an ecosystem that really only thrives if it has a strong NIH at the center. So now is not the time to abandon NIH research. We want to make sure you share that message. It represents hope for patients across the country. It helps secure America's global leadership in innovation, and it generates economic impact in every state. So I encourage you to talk to your elected officials, tell them about your research, tell them about, as Nancy mentioned, how has NIH touched your life or your career. Tell them why it's important to their district and their state. And I would encourage you to bring the various perspectives with you to that conversation. Don't go at it alone. We're an ecosystem, as this conversation illustrated, and bringing all these perspectives, I think, is very helpful.
Thank you very much. I want to close this on time. It's 1 p.m. Eastern time. So it's about time for us to just say, closing. Thank you so much to the panel members. I think that everybody expressed incredible enthusiasm for making the process even more efficient, acknowledging that it is already incredibly efficient. A 2.5 return on investment is much better than my pension fund. I wish I could invest into NIH and get back 2.5 for my pension fund, but we will see how things go. Thank you so much, attendees, for connecting today, and thank you again to the panel members. Have a good afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye now.